everybody, it's Nick with the Mediocre Garden. Welcome to my channel. Today we are stepping out of the garden and into another area that I am completely mediocre at, and that is crafting. We're going to make beeswax wraps. The main ingredients that you'll need include beeswax. I got this big lump of beeswax from a local honey producer. You'll need jojoba oil, and you'll need pine resin. You'll need a lot of parchment paper and some fabric just so you can iron on it. Also, I have a board on my counter in order to protect the counter. I have a knife that I use to cut chunks of the beeswax off. You can grate it, but I didn't have a grater that I wanted to get covered in wax, so I just used the knife and chunked it off. You'll need a paintbrush that you won't want to use for anything else after this, so this can be your beeswax paintbrush. You can reuse it the next time. I used a wooden chopstick to stir. You might also like to have a pair of tongs, and I used a ladle to keep the tin can from floating away in the water. You can use a double boiler, but because everything ends up coated in wax, I used an old tin can and a canning ring. And I set the canning ring inside with the tin can on top of it. And then to keep it from floating away, I just rested a ladle on top. You'll need a 100% cotton fabric. Quilting fabric works perfect. You can have standard sizes, 6 by 6 all the way up to 12 by 12, or you can do some unusual smaller shapes like I did for smaller items. I finished the edges with a pinking shear just to make sure it didn't fray as much. And then of course, you'll need an iron. And you may want to just have a mold, an old chocolate mold or a silicone mold, so that you can pour any of your extra beeswax into that mold and then save it for the next time. It looks like it's almost ready. There's just a little layer on the bottom that I want to make sure is completely melted and incorporated. I'm very nervous about this because if you've ever gotten pine sap on a piece of clothing or somewhere, I mean, it never comes off. So I'm a little scared, if I'm being honest, about how this next part is going to go. So I want to just be completely ready. Okay, I'm going to go for it. Got some on my thing. I was trying not to do. I'm using an old chopstick. I'm just making sure it's incorporated okay. Looks like there's a bit of residue on the bottom, but I think it's all right. Okay. It looks very sticky. Okay, here we go. Brush it onto the fabric. You want it to soak in quite well. And you want to move pretty quickly, is what I've read. I've got an extra fabric underneath it just to catch any of the drips. So this will be my beeswax fabric forever, I think. Not too hot. If it starts to harden, you're going to iron it to really incorporate it, so it should be okay. I'm trying to make sure that it's very even. forget to put parchment over top. You should start to see the excess come off, it says. Make sure it's on. Oh, it's not hot. My iron has a setting that if you leave it too long, it does, then you don't tip it, it shuts off. So it heats up pretty quick though, so. Oh yeah, you can see the excess coming off here. That means it's really incorporating into the fabric. Oh. I'm trying to make sure I get it all the way to the edges really well. Okay, so it's quite wet, and now I want to peel it off of here. Ah, it's hot. And I'm just hanging it on a clothes rack so that it can dry. All right, the beeswax wraps have been cooling, and now I'd like to see if I can get them to actually stick to something. I found earlier when I tried it, they weren't quite cool. They did leave a residue on the jar and the bowl that I tried. So I'm going to try a new one because I want to see if it still leaves a residue. So this is the beeswax wrap. This is a small one. I found when I hung them to cool, at first I hung them in the middle, and they do leave a little bit of the wax residue on the clothes rack that I was hanging it on. Next time I might try to use clothespins and clip it. I think that might be a little bit better. But I did put them between layers of parchment, again, melted the wax again, and then when I laid them, I only laid them with just the very edge touching it, and it seems to be a little bit better. They definitely can be folded. You can see they fold quite nicely. So you could easily just fold them and keep them in a drawer. Let's see if they actually stick to the jar. Okay, so this is my clean jar, so I can make sure to see if it leaves any residue behind. You have to mold it a little bit with your hands. The heat of your hands will help it stick together. This looks pretty good, actually. It's sticking quite nicely. I don't have any liquid in the jar to actually test it, but I might try that next. So that sticks pretty good. That's quite nice, actually. So here's a larger piece. Again, folds up quite nicely. You could get it quite small if you needed to. Let's try it. It molds quite good. I think it's sticking not too bad. I wouldn't want anything with a lot of liquid in it, I don't think, for this, but this bowl itself might be partly the problem. Yeah, once you start really working at it, it's sticking to itself quite nicely. It's leaving a bit of a residue on my fingers, but it's not too bad. Over time, that might get a little bit better. The jury is still out a little bit on these for me. I don't really like the little bit of stickiness that they leave on my hands, on the jars or bowls that I've used. That said, the stickiness does come off easily with just a little bit of soap and water. So we'll see if maybe the stickiness goes away a little with a little more use. For even a mediocre crafter, I think this is a pretty good craft. It's useful, relatively easy to follow, didn't make too much of a mess, and I honestly thought it was going to, and works really nicely. If you end up trying it, please leave me a comment below. I'd love to know how it went for you. Definitely go check out apieceofthe.rainbow.com where I found all of these instructions and the recipe to make this. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you next time.